Adrienne Brodeur is the author of the memoir Wild Game, which was selected as a Best Book of the Year by NPR and the Washington Post, and is in development as a Netflix film. Her new novel is Little Monsters. She founded the literary magazine Zoetrope All Story with Francis Ford Coppola, and currently serves as the executive director of Aspen Words, a literary nonprofit and program of the Aspen Institute. She splits her time between Cambridge and Cape Cod, where she lives with her husband and children. Please join me in welcoming Adrienne.
I get the big throne.
Yeah. We went to a wedding last June. I went to a wedding where the husband was in this huge throne and the wife was in this little seat. And it was so bizarre. I don't know. I think being in this church, it's fraught and weighty to be in these historic spaces all over the island. And I wanted to, just tell you a little bit about Adrienne's novel, Little Monsters. It's a story of a complicated family, the Gardeners, their secrets, and it's set during the summer of 2016 on Cape Cod. Each family member is grappling with what it means to be relevant within their own family unit and within the larger world. It's about a lot of other things as well, which you'll have to read. And I wanted to tell Adrienne a little bit about the Gardeners on Nantucket, something you might not know. We had 2 Gardener families on Nantucket who settled the island. Gardeners with an I, gardeners, and gardeners without an I. They spelled their names differently. And to differentiate between these gardeners, the gardeners with an I were the seeing gardeners, and the gardeners without an I were the blind gardeners. And your gardeners are blind gardeners. They are blind to what's going on within their own family.
Yes.
Sometimes they're blind to these secrets. So I just think that's a fitting connection here. And I wondered if you could just introduce everybody a little bit to the Gardner family.
To the Gardeners, certainly. So after I wrote Wild Game, which was my memoir about my complicated relationship with my mother and my somewhat dysfunctional family, it was very thrilling to write a fictional dysfunctional family. So it is a very small family. It's 3 people, the patriarch, Adam Gardner, and his 2 adult children. And I will, before telling you about them, I'll skip and say I was so excited when I handed it in to my editor, and I kind of proudly said, and there is no mother in this. Like, I've gotten over my mother stuff. And she read the book, and she said, Adrienne, you are aware that the mother haunts every character in this book? It's like, So at the start of the book, it's the summer of 2016, and the book sort of takes place in the months before the election. And you're following this family very closely, and everything appears to be going wonderfully for the Gardners. So the patriarch, Adam, is 70 years old. He's a marine biologist studying humpback whale communication. He's at the top of his game, and he thinks he's just on the brink of this huge discovery. His adult son, Ken, has just sealed a real estate deal that sort of catapulted him to, a new stratosphere of wealth, and that is going to enable him to run for Congress, which is his big goal. And Abby, the daughter, who is 38, has finally found her voice as an artist. And we know that she's about to be discovered in a big way. And of course, this is how everything seems, but we all know that nothing is ever as it seems.
Definitely. You set this novel in many different parts of Cape Cod, and I will tell you that on Nantucket, people tend to have a homogeneous view of Cape Cod. I am from Cape Cod, and I know that the 15 towns are different. Immediately when we read about Ken being in Chatham, I think, okay, I know this guy.
Yeah.
If he lived in Eastham, he'd be a different guy.
Right.
And
no, I love that you know that, because I think, that was one of the things that I really wanted to do. I think most people who are not on Cape Cod kind of view Cape Cod as this one arm that is all, that is all, homogeneous, as you said. And I have to say, Provincetown is as different from Chatham as Las Vegas is from Boston. Like, each town is so specific and particular.
And I loved seeing how these characters are all, related to, they have different relationships to the sea. Adam, as a marine biologist, is out there in Stellwagen Bank. He's really thinking about the whales under the water, listening to. I love that scene on his boat, putting the microphone down under the water, thinking about Ken living on the edge. His house is precariously perched. He's planting the grass. He's sort of waging war with the shoreline, and Abby, in her, in the Arcadia, is really enveloped in nature and in place. So can you talk a little bit about how you see place shaping these characters and how place shapes you in your writing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, little church metaphor, when I say, you all must feel the same way about Nantucket that I feel about Cape Cod, but I think there's something so magical and beautiful about these islands, and I feel like it has to do with the fragility of the land, it has to do with the light, and how, at every moment, it feels like you're looking at an entirely different view. The marsh grass changes color, if there's the tide, there's sandbars or not. I mean, it's so gorgeous. And in my life, I've lived in a bunch of different places, but Cape Cod has been the only sort of consistent thing for my 50-some years on the planet. I have always spent a good chunk of time on Cape Cod. So it's really home to me, and it's really just my favorite place. But I grew up, my dad was a fisherman. I mean, he's a writer, but he was a fisherman and a gardener, and I really appreciate everything about the land. I feel like I've forgotten some piece of the question. And for each of the characters, I mean, it means different things to each person, just as it would to each of you. But it was fun to explore that. Like, how would it be different for, a marine biologist to an artist to a developer, et cetera. So I'm struggling to try to figure out if I can write a book not set on Cape Cod.
I see no need to do so. I think we, all loved being transported to those different parts of the Cape. It's funny. I work in historic preservation, and I don't know that I would have ever felt a huge kinship with somebody like Ken, who was looking to develop the land. But I think he's just such an interesting character. They all are. You're getting in there with everybody's point of view. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what it was like developing those different points of view. Were there other POV characters that came and went?
Yeah, so I was really interested in kind of cracking open this family and taking a very close and compassionate look at each one. And, that was what was so fun about having a really close third-person point of view and it would alternate from all sorts of, all 5 characters. And yes, there were more, and I scaled back because it got a little like a circus. But with someone like Ken, I am actually really grateful that you said that, because I feel like on the outside, it's really easy to think Ken is kind of a jerk. But if you look at him, he's also the most wounded person in the book. He lost his mother when he was old enough to understand the loss, whereas Abby was just, days old, hours old at the time. And so, and then the father, who's a little bit nutty, women have come and gone, and then Abby, his sister, sort of pushes him away. So he's really a wounded person, and humans, like all other animals, are at their most aggressive when they're wounded. But I love character more than anything else in a book. I think it's truly the most important thing, that everything else springs from them. You have to see what they are going to do, and that's where your sort of plot comes. And I remember this, actually, I started with Wild Game because I really didn't want to write, a Mommy Dearest style memoir with, my mom all bad and me just the little innocent. And so I remember reading this incredible line by Vivian Gornick, and I've said it before, but the line was something like, in order for the drama to deepen, you must show the loneliness of the monster and the cunning of the innocent. And I remember loving that line so much, and it was sort of taped onto my computer and how I wrote my memoir, and then I kind of thought, oh no, I'm gonna have to think of a whole new guiding principle, North Star line for Little Monsters, and I was like, no, that one just does it. And so with each of these characters, you know, they're all deeply flawed, like every one of us, so I just, you know, I'm just really not interested in heroes and villains. I'm fascinated by what's, you know, courageous and corrupt in all of us, because we all have both, I think. Are any of you all good?
You must confess, we're in a church.
Did you tell them the Wi-Fi code yet? Sorry.
No, you can tell them.
The Wi-Fi code in this church, if anyone wants to get on it, is Jesus 123. Lowercase
I
j.
feel like they're going to have to change it now.
I know, I'm sorry, whoops.
Please, NCTV, cut that out. Madness, mania, is a big part of the book, Adam's story. And it was probably, I don't know, 7 years ago, we had Kay Redfield Jameson here talking about her book, Robert Lowell, Setting the River on Fire, a study of genius, madness, and character. And we learned that Robert Lowell did some of his best work when he was in the throes of mania. And Adam is trying to do that same thing.
Yes.
How did you tap into those manic moods?
I have people with bipolar disorder in my family, but I also had this experience when I was in my late 20s. I had just moved to New York, and I was between jobs, and literally a very close friend of mine, his younger sister, appeared on my doorstep one day. I'd never met her. She was in her 20s as well, and she was so clearly just in mania. I mean, but she was this very rapid cycler. Adam is sort of a slow cycler. And within maybe 48 hours, and I'd been talking to my friend the whole time, she sort of came down. But what was fascinating about it to me was she was, you know, she had kind of a small, sweet life. She was a nursery school teacher. She, you know, just wasn't phenomenally well educated or anything else. And yet, during this mania, the things she could connect, like it was like every single thing that had ever lodged in her brain ever, you know, like a Shakespeare sonnet, a this, a that, and she was just going so rapid fire. And so to actually see her come down and the loss she felt and the knowing that she was gonna be, have to go back on this medication and everything else, just sort of that whole tamping down and how devastated she was by it. And I have never seen it in that extreme again. And I do think, you know, I'm no psychiatrist or anything else, but I do feel like we can all relate to times when we're really fired up and charged and can't sleep and the ideas are coming, or maybe it's just me.
This is what writing, that's like, to me,
yeah.
That's what it feels like when you're really in a good place. So I was
feel
kind of scared that I identified so much with that.
No, I feel, yeah, no, right. But I feel like, you know, the relevancy bit is true not just when you're 70. I mean, you can be 30 and sort of, you know, we all think we're going to do such incredible things when we're kids and we're going to save the world or be president or whatever we're going to be. And then there are these moments where you're like, what's the rest going to look like? What am I going to do now? And so, you know, Adam was feeling that particularly strongly, but his idea, because he's had bipolar disorder his whole life and he's been medicated, but, you know, he was so desperate to have this last big discovery, this big breakthrough. And, you know, as many people who have mental illness, he wanted to tinker with his medication to kind of ride the wave of this mania, because he thought once his brain was unanesthetized, he could kind of connect the dots of this theory that was percolating.
I'm thinking about riding the wave and just all these ocean metaphors, you know, going through. How many whale watches did you go on to write this novel?
I just say, yeah, the research was so fun. But, you know, the beauty of writing fiction, of course, is you can give your characters all the jobs that you want, right? You know, my kids would always ask me, what would you be if you weren't a writer? And duh, marine biologist. Like, what would anyone want to be? When I took my daughter around to colleges, when we looked at Bowdoin, I was like, this is it. It has this gorgeous marine. Yeah, she was not into it. But so I already knew a lot about whales just because I'm obsessed with them. But I did do a lot of research. The effort was actually to kind of hold back on every single humpback whale fact I knew, and only to, sprinkle in the good ones. My favorite is that they have pink milk because they eat, 30 tons of krill a day or whatever it is. So they're, yeah. I've got others.
Don't go to the Whaling Museum. It'll bum you out. I'm just
It will.
No,
It will.
It will.
But there was this, I've got to just,
Yes,
one other
please.
little whale thing.
Yes.
This is the superstitious whale thing. So when I finally finished the manuscript, and it's never really done, but I was like, okay, should I hit send? Should I send it to my editor? Am I going to do it right now? I'm sorry, I'm in a church. I'm not particularly religious. I don't pray, but I was kind of like, give me a sign. Anyone give me a sign. And then on my feed, all of a sudden, do you guys remember when that Provincetown lobsterman was followed by the humpback whale and then spit back out? That burst in my feed. And I'm like, okay, send. That is a sign.
Yeah, that's what I went to.
And then I had an interviewer who actually dated that lobsterman as a teenager.
Well, I will tell you.
Was that you?
No, I do know that. I know the captain of the boat, but when I went to school with the lobsterman's nephew.
Okay.
So there's my connection to you.
It's a small
to the
world,
Packard
6
family.
degrees of separation.
Speaking of the Packard family, speaking of artwork, there's a lot of artwork in this novel. Visual artists. Jenny and Abby are both visual artists, and Abby's studio is a real central setting. There's a lot that goes on there. And her artwork is a lot different than the kind of art that we might be used to seeing on the Cape and Islands. She's not painting landscapes of sunsets and lighthouses. Was it challenging to write about visual art? And how did you research those sections?
Yeah, it was challenging because I sort of had it in my head. I wanted this character to, she's discovering her voice, and I wanted her to be finding her story, but I didn't want her to be a writer. I didn't want it to be, too autobiographical or anything. So I was trying to figure out in what way, what artists would, in what way could art be doing that same thing? And so I do have a lot of artist friends, and so a lot of it was simply them giving me names and looking at all different kinds of art, and then sort of creating a composite in my head. But, not being an artist, you also have beta readers. Like one of my friends, thank God for beta readers, she read the whole book, and she said all of the stuff about art was great, but at one point, the Abby character is making paint, and I, very carefully researched how you made paint, but I did watercolor when it's oil. She was like, no. So, but the research is fun, and I feel like research and character are sort of similar in as much as, you do so much research, and really it's like an iceberg. You can only just reveal a tiny bit of it, but you have to know so much stuff so that the character, has a throwaway line, that just indicates his knowledge, if you will.
Definitely, speaking about character, you've written, obviously, memoir and fiction. Fiction, you have so much power, as you're talking about. You control this whole universe, this place where all these people, you have to know every single thing about these people. And we're spending a lot of time with these characters. When you were writing your memoir, did you have to look at yourself as a character?
Yes, and you definitely do, and also you have to do a surprising amount of research with a memoir as well, because we all, you kind of have to loosen the grip of your own version of things, the top, and really put yourself into other people's shoes. I mean, one of the most informative things for me in writing the memoir was really doing a deep dive on my mother, and I became so much more compassionate. It was such a process of developing empathy, because I suddenly was sort of understanding all the things she'd gone through. She was an only child to 2 alcoholic parents. She lost her first child, just on and on. But when you really take that point of view, it feels quite different. But yes, I did have to, separate myself a bit in order to be as honest, because I think the thing you must do with memoir is not protect yourself. You have to, the first thing anyone will get annoyed with in a memoir is like, oh, here's the author's halo. You have to be as tough on yourself as you're going to be on anyone else. And that's, it's a little scary. So you have to sort of step back and look at it and be as honest as you can.
Speaking of scary.
Great.
I think, if you haven't read Adrienne's memoir, Wild Game, it's about lots of things, but the central thing that you need to know going into it is that Adrienne was her mother's confidant as her mother carried on a decades-long affair with her stepfather's best friend. And Adrienne was swept into this world as a teenager, this adult world, and this sort of, I don't know. I remember being a teenager and that longing to be seen as an adult, as somebody, who mattered, right? But this is a memoir that really resonated with a lot of readers, and it's a pretty singular experience. But I think what was so compelling to me was that we got to watch you sort of choose the freedom that came with the truth as you were going through this narrative. What was going through your head on the day that came out? Were you terrified? Were you exhilarated? Were you just...
I have never been more scared in my life. I will just absolutely say that. It's funny because yesterday I was talking to Kwame, who wrote a memoir, and another woman who wrote a memoir. But there is this period after you write it and before it comes out that is possibly the most vulnerable you've ever felt. Once it came out, and once I realized that, it wasn't all about judging me or judging, it was, people were so generous and so grateful. And they, even if no one else, had the same experience as I did of being a wingman to your parents' adultery or something, but they did have the experience of having a parent who didn't have good boundaries, or having a parent that was very powerful, or having, a history of, some kind of pattern. There was a pattern of deception in my family that just had gone on for generations. And so, my own struggle to break free of that pattern was something a lot of people could identify with, even if, their stories were nothing like my own.
I think that, was there a voice in your head when you were writing your memoir that was saying that you had to push away, like, other people are going to read this? And has your daughter read your memoir? And again, with this idea, because I think it's a really incredible gift to give your family to sort of break this cycle.
Yeah.
And to be able to, you've understood your own mother more. I imagine your children will understand you more in the reading of this.
Yeah, I didn't have to push anything out of my head during the writing. I find writing as a rule just this, I feel so privileged to do it. I feel like it is such a fascinating thing to do. It's the way I discover how I think and what I really feel about something, because you're sort of, you're digging into yourself, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. But I also had, 40 years to process that situation, which happened when I was 14. And oddly, my daughter turned 14 the year that the book came out. So the question of did they read it? My son, if I could get him to read a book, I would get, he does read, but he was young at the time. He had absolutely no interest. And my daughter, I remember her picking it up one day and kind of looking at it, and she is a big reader. And I have to say, as someone who at 14 was so obsessed with my mother's life, so enmeshed in it, she was like, yeah,
That's a good sign.
So it was, right? So she loves world-building fiction. She likes sci-fi. She likes this other stuff. And I I remember thinking, well, I can be offended or I can pat myself on the back. And I choose to think it's great. Someday she'll read it. Both my parents were writers. I have still not read every page of every book. I mean, I've read most of their stuff, but I certainly hadn't as a teenager, and I don't expect that my kids will.
It sounds like some healthy boundaries.
Thank you. Aren't I healthy? Aren't I doing a good job?
Before we go and take a couple of questions from the audience, I had just one last question, which is that you wrote a beautiful essay for the Boston Globe recently. If you haven't seen it, it was around Memorial Day, about beachcombing, walking, writing, and I'm wondering what's your best beachcombing find? What are you looking for that you haven't found?
I go out with different intentions. Sometimes you need to find lucky stones. Sometimes you need to find sea glass. It is different every day, but I find I do my best thinking on this 6-mile walk, 3 miles out and back on the outer peninsula of Nauset Beach. So if there's the public beach, if you just keep walking north, there's just this beautiful little spit of sand that's gorgeous. My best find, I have had so many good finds, but my best find, which was during the pandemic, was a great white shark tooth about this big. And I picked it up and I was like, no. And that was also in the middle of the winter. It was just, it has a place of honor. But I love walking on the beach. And I always have this, Mary Oliver was our Cape Cod poet, our Provincetown poet, and there's this line in one of her poems that is also sort of a guiding force in my writing anyway, but it's pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. And I just love that line.
Me too. Please we've got time for some questions. If you've got some.
Don't
I know
be
it's scary
shy.
to go first.
There's one.
Oh, not yet.
No.
Hold on. You could take mine.
Hello?
Hey,
Yeah.
there you are.
So I'm in the process of writing a memoir, but the people are still alive. So this is a big concern for me. Were your characters, the main characters, deceased?
No, my mother was, all the step-parents were deceased at the time that I really started writing it as memoir. My mother was still alive, and she knew I was writing it when I started, and she was, in fact, very helpful. Like, she gave me, she was a food writer, and she gave me her journals, which were much more, I love them. They're like meal to meal, which is fabulous. But it was also, you have to, it's hard to figure out your own timeline. Like, we all remember, well, I graduated from high school this year and this and that. But I remember much of my childhood by meals, and then I could cross-check with her column in the Boston Globe when she did, the squab or whatnot. But she, I was nervous to have her read it. She developed dementia while I was writing it. And weirdly, I feel very guilty about that because I feel like, oh, I get the last say. And I did read it to her while I was writing it, and I have to say she was pretty thrilled. I just think she loved being this sort of badass, seductive, sexy woman, powerful in the kitchen, when in fact she was losing all her power. So she liked what I read her, but she was never, by the end, there was no way she could read and hold a book. So I do not know. And yeah, these are all conversations. There was my brother, there was my ex-husband, there were people that I did, offer the book to get those reads. And I tried to be very sensitive, but also my memoir really was very centrally focused on this one relationship. So I didn't really do a deep dive on anyone else in my family. It was just focused there. But yeah, it is hard. Mary Karr has a great book, The Art of Memoir, if you've read that, because she sort of, proposes that you do show it to people. I don't know. Good luck.
Thank
Thank you. I loved reading your novel, Little Monsters, and I loved the different points of view. And I was wondering which perspective was the most interesting to write from and which was the most difficult?
I love that question. Weirdly, the bipolar 70-year-old cranky brilliant guy just came no problem. I loved Adam so much, and I could literally just sort of put my hands out, and it was. I've never had that with a character before. I don't imagine I will ever again. But he just kind of came into my head fully formed. You know, obviously he changed a bit through the book. For the rest of the characters, honestly, they were all sort of difficult in their own way. And for me, anyway, I have to pretty much write to the end of the book to really understand who my characters are. Because, you know, we all start, I mean, I don't know how many of you write here, but we all start with, you've got, okay, like, I got the crazy uncle, and you sort of have the equivalent of a stick figure, you know, the little head and this. And then it's when you put them into situations, it's when you have them in conversation with someone else that, oh, this one's funny, and he gets the hiccups, or whatever it is, you know, you know more and more and more. And so by the end of the novel, I feel like I have a really good understanding of their emotional complexity and all that. So while in the beginning I might know what they do and kind of really generic, he's a happy guy, he's a mean guy, you know, that type of thing, then I do that at the end.
Thank you very much for your thoughts, very provocative.
Thank you.
You mentioned how important place was to you for your own personal development and in your writing. Would you say something about the time setting of Little Monsters?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So I set the book in 2016 before the election, and I did that very intentionally before the election, mostly because of every single summer I ever spent on Cape Cod. I just felt like you could feel the anxiety in 2016. Like you could just, everyone knew the ground was shifting. We didn't know how it was shifting. Most of us thought it was going to shift one way that made some parts of the population worried, but there could be other. But I just remember thinking, this is like a weird time to be alive, like just watching people. And it was just a little bit before the #MeToo movement, but you know, you could tell some men were getting really worried about it. I mean, it was one of those periods that just kind of vibrated. And what I loved about ending it before the election is that just, you know, the reader knows something that the characters don't. And so a lot of the characters were, you know, very optimistically thinking one way.
So was I, yeah.
All of us. But, yeah. Oh. I'm just going to say before she gets on that, this is the secret amazing thing about book tours or doing anything like this is that inevitably someone from your past, it could be I've had my daughter's nursery school teacher in California or my best friend from kindergarten. And I have known Jessica, not well in recent years, but in 5th grade. Wow. So, hi, Jessica.
Well, hi, Rennie. You talk so much about reading in
Yes.
Wild Game and how you, through a ex-stepmother, kind of discovered books and the love of books, and with your work with Zoetrope and also the Aspen Words. How hard is it to read a lot and then write and not have other people's writing seep into your writing?
Yeah, I know a lot of writers have that problem, and I don't. And I don't know if that's just because I started older, but I feel like I know what my voice is, and so I truly admire other writers, and I'm amazed. And I read a lot. I read a lot, but I never feel like, whew, you know, now that I've read Faulkner recently, I'm going to be starting, you know, it doesn't really happen for me. That said, I have some of my favorite books are obviously all on the shelf closest to where I'm writing. And every now and then when you get stuck, I can just like flip to the chapter opening and go like, oh, she's just starting in a different room, or just these little reminders of just, yeah, you can do this or you can do that liberate. But I don't feel worried about sounding like other people.
We have time for one more question, and there's one right down here. Right here.
I think my favorite part of Little Monsters was the birthday party. The chaos.
Yes.
It was just amazing. How did you come up with it?
Okay, that is one of my, thank you for that question. So, when you start a book, you do not have the whole thing in your head. I feel like you notice where your mind is going, what this little, whatever, the little woodpecker in your brain that just when you're doing dishes or taking a walk and you're just like, I'm thinking about siblings. So for this book, I was thinking about siblings. I was wondering how is it that people who grow up in the same household can just be so different? And so here's how the party scene came to me, because I knew I wanted to write about this. I knew it was Cape Cod. I knew it was 2016. I knew I wanted to have this weird sibling dynamic, but I did not know what. So I thought, okay, I need to read, the beginning of all sibling stories, Cain and Abel. Okay, I read Cain and Abel. There is nothing to that story. It is like 3 lines long. There is no character motivation. It is bones.
We're in a church.
And I was stunned. What?
We're in a church.
Sorry. But I remember just being like, wait, what? I must be reading the wrong version. I read all the different versions. They're all about 3 sentences. They gave gifts. God liked one. Cain kills Abel. The end. But that is where I found the structure. I didn't even realize it right away, but it was like, giving of gifts. These 2 kids, I'm going to reveal so much about their characters, these 2 adult kids, in the gifts that they give their father on this 70th birthday. And then knowing that was sort of the narrative propulsion of the book, and knowing that trajectory enabled me to sort of really figure out the gifts and all the misunderstandings and why it would come to that particular scene. But that was a lot of fun to write. And then, of course, I had no idea what happened afterwards. Had to figure that out.
Well, speaking of gifts, Adrienne will be signing copies of Little Monsters, which would be a great Father's Day gift, and Wild Game would be a great Mother's Day gift. Why
yes.
not?
Never thought of that.
So she'll be out on the lawn, and join me in thanking Adrienne for being here today.